Andrew. And the next session is on brain capital, creativity, and public sector innovation. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Theo, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry for everyone. I've turned off my video. I'm speaking today from Nigeria, Abuja, Nigeria, which has been my home for more than a decade.
Andrew, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Sorry, just to say that Shekar should be there, and it was in the previous session. So if Shekar is there, maybe
go ahead.
we can
Hey,
first,
Shekar,
first have Shekar and then you, Andrew. Shekar, are you there?
Yes, he's there. I'm there, but I didn't want to disturb the presentation by
you.
so why don't I come later?
Sarah, I had Shekar right after Andrew based on Rem's text. Okay, so I'm sorry, Andrew, that floor is back to you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm Shekar, wonderful to see you here. First, my name is Andrew. I'm speaking to you, as I said, from Africa, Nigeria. I am the co-chair, along with Rim, of the Brain Capital Index Working Group. And I just want to say a big thank you to everyone. I have been riveted in the conversations today. And it shows you, if you go to the excellent presentation that Sarah did, I mean, of course, in our Brain Capital Index or dashboard group, we have kind of many dimensions that we've talked about, things like resiliency, social capital, connectedness, brain health, et cetera. And here we've spent almost 4 hours, or we'll spend 4 hours discussing just at a surface level, just one of those dimensions. And it shows you the complexity of what we're trying to take on with the Brain Capital project. And of course, I think that people have commented, and Rimmer has said as well, I mean, what's really been critical to the little progress we've made, because we've got so far to go, of course, is bringing together people from breaking down the silos and bringing them from multiple disciplines. But let me just make a couple of remarks at this stage for this section. Let me start out by saying, the way I got involved in this is I wrote a book about replacing the GDP lens with the flourishing lens. That is not really measuring GDP, and just by academic background, I'm an economist. I've spent 35 years in the private sector, and made the argument that said, really, why do we even measure GDP? Because if you think about the relationship between GDP and well-being, it's not nearly as close as I think a lot of economists and a lot of people think. So, for example, Costa Rica has 1/5 the GDP of the United States. It has a longer life expectancy. Kerala, which is the most southern state in India, 30 million people, has 1/30, like 3%, 4% the GDP per capita of the United States, and it has higher literacy rate. So you think about well-being, the relationship between GDP and well-being is not that strong. So we wrote a book about this, discussing, and it really came out and said what we should be focused on from a public policy viewpoint is flourishing, human flourishing. And I'm a Canadian, and as a Canadian, I get up every day, even though I live in Nigeria, and I think about, the reason we wrote this book is what would we tell the Right Honorable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that he should be thinking about? How does he know whether Canada is doing well? Are the people, are they doing not productive things? Are they thriving? Are they flourishing? What's the suicide rate? What's the mental illness rate? Are people creative? Are people having meaningful work? Do they have meaningful relationships? Are they bowling alone? And that's what led me to the brain capital exercise here, because if you think about flourishing as the end product, how do you get there? So brain capital, in my view, is the intermediate step. And the hypothesis of, I think, probably everyone on this call today is, if you have high brain capital, you're presumably going to have high well-being in some sense. But there's a lot of research work that needs to be done to prove that out. And in the particular kind of causality or relationships between different elements of brain capital and different elements of flourishing or whatever well-being metric that you want to choose. So if we take, for example, entrepreneurship, which we're talking today, we still have to prove, in my view, that the high level of the creativity, which may lead to a high level of entrepreneurship, leads to better flourishing outcomes on that. So there's a lot of work to be done on that. But in terms of the specific issue for this last section of it on the public sector, I think that what the work over the last 2 years has really highlighted to me, and others have said, I think Alejandro, for example, is that I think we're going to come back to a point where some large component of improving human brain capital at the individual and a population level is going to depend on reforms of the educational system. So if you go back to if the theory is, or if we want to improve human flourishing and well-being, and the mechanism to do that is improve brain capital, and we have the dimensions of brain capital, then presumably the next question is, what are the inputs that you need to increase brain capital across the relevant dimensions? And what we're going to find is, while there's many things you can do as an individual when you're older, I'm almost retired, so at the end of this stage, the formative years are going to have the biggest impact on that. So I think we're going to be led to what reforms have to happen in the education system that are going to improve the dimensions of brain capital, and for the purpose of our discussion today, of creativity measured in some appropriate way. I also think that in terms of the public sector side of it, as the discussion for this panel, that in addition to education, the other thing we're going to have to work on is the sensitization. So, I mean, I wrote the original book on flourishing because I just got tired of our obsession with GDP. As I said, if the relationship between GDP and human well-being is not very strong, why are we thinking much about GDP? I think we're going to have a lot of work to do in sensitizing the public sector, the elected officials, the policymakers, that said, actually, we're measuring completely the wrong things. What you want to know is, if our theories are right, the evidence proves it out, that the brain these dimensions of brain capital will lead to better outcomes. They'll lead to better outcomes for the individual. They'll lead to better outcomes for the groups the individual is involved with. They'll lead to better outcomes to the nation, and they'll lead to better outcomes for the world. And Harris enumerated some of the mechanisms that would work through. So I think that just to tee up this panel for the next 50 minutes, those are the two elements where I think the public sector has a huge role to play. Is what reforms do we need in the way we educate the large majority of our people, from all infancy through to the young 20s, perhaps later, and how do we influence public sector and policymakers, politicians' perceptions of the brain and the dimensions of the brain, and what sort of policies would support increasing brain capital along the relevant dimensions, including, of course, the creativity one. So Theo, let me stop there, and I'm really interested in listening to others. And again, just thank you so much for the immense contributions today. It's just too much for my small brain to absorb.
I think you're really underselling the size of your brain there, Andrew. Thanks. Let me ask you just a very quick question. Is it fair to say that in your comments you're saying that well-being and creativity are antecedent conditions to economic growth instead of outputs of economic growth?
Well, I'm saying I'm not really interested in economic growth. I don't think it's I think it's only interesting in our context of what this group is trying to do, in the sense that it would be helpful if having higher brain capital also led to higher economic growth, because then when we speak to policymakers, we can use that language, which is the language they understand. But I've stood up publicly in my public roles here in Nigeria. I've said we should simply stop measuring GDP. And in fact, we're making that transition here. Just in this context, people are starting to talk much more about SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, and measuring those than GDP.
Okay.
So that's a transition I'd like to see. But in the interim, I think we still need to use, and I am trained as an economist, we still need to use the traditional language of economics to make the case that we make. So it would be a happy outcome if by improving brain capital we had human flourishing or well-being improve, and simultaneously we had GDP improve. But I personally am not that interested in the GDP improvement. Okay,
thank you so much. I appreciate that. Shakar, we're coming to you next, and then after Shakar, we will go to Matza from BioCat, and then we'll come to Anna after that. So Shakar, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Theo, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to join earlier, but I'm part of the Brain Capital group, so I'm aware about the happenings there. Just to introduce myself, I am currently a professor for the practice of global mental health at Harvard School of Public Health, and before that I worked for WHO for about 20 years, and I was in the last 8 years heading the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, which included brain health. And I'm a psychiatrist by training. So what I will say is somewhat from a very narrow perspective on the health sector and the international international organizations and ministries of health as to how they deal with the issue of brain capital. My awareness about creativity is somewhat limited, but I will try to see whether there is any link between my kind of work and creativity. My uh, basic premise is that ministries of health, as a part of public sector, are not really involved at all, either with the brain capital or with the creativity. They are very conventional bunch of people who take their work in a very limited manner. In fact, they're mostly called ministries of health, but they actually are ministries of diseases, because what they do is to identify diseases, to try to treat them, cure them, and look after the people who have diseases. They are not at all bothered about what's happening to the other people who don't have diseases, including efforts on prevention as well as promotion. Prevention of diseases, promotion of health as well as mental health and brain health. And that is a particular problem because they can and should play a big role in improving the brain capital, but they are not taking that seriously. The situation is especially bad in low and middle income countries, although there are some bright examples amongst them. But by and large, those are too concerned, too involved in identifying brain and mental health issues and trying to treat them by establishing centers, by training people, and so on. In fact, what is necessary, and I tried to some extent but largely failed, was to actually engage them with other ministries to look at the bigger picture. And I will give an example, in fact, continuing from where Andrew was speaking from, of early child development, which strictly is a health issue, but health ministries deal with that in collaboration with ministries of education, social welfare, as well as some other ministries, including, say, poverty alleviation ministry in many low-income countries. And that is one of the prime examples, in fact, an exception as to how ministries of health actually become much more preventive and promotive rather than just treatment. And there are several countries which are actually taking the early child development as a major program and succeeding in that, which actually is a very good thing for the future of the brain capital, because these children who are developing well will have their brain capacity very much retained. In fact, to use Andrew's word, will thrive in their life as well as in their brain capital, and will add to even the economical capital, which obviously is important for countries, even if that should not be. So those are the kind of examples which come to my mind, which prove that a lot is possible from within ministries of health, but actually is not happening. Taking the other side of the life spectrum, a lot is possible during early adulthood as well as middle and older age groups, where retention of the cognitive abilities is something that we need to strive for. And WHO published a document recently about avoiding risks for cognitive decline and dementia, which actually is much more useful and much more practicable than treating dementia once it develops. So those are the kind of examples which ministries of health can take and run with it to actually do what they're supposed to do, to improve health and to improve brain health rather than just to treat diseases. So what I am describing is a story of disappointments, but still a hope that in future some of these things will become much more acceptable and will lead to action, which will eventually improve brain capital and hopefully creativity, and even using creative methods to do that. I stop here, will be willing to discuss it further. Thank you.
Thank you, Shekar. Your contributions and discussions over the last many months have been incredible to learn from your experiences as the group has developed all of this. And as you were talking, one of the things that kind of surfaced for me was again the work of Dr. Mobley at Harvard, when she has been looking at the retirement age, and what she has found more recently is that creativity associated with the job, with your job, leads to higher quality of life in the years preceding right after retirement, but the same finding was not found with creativity not related to your job performance, to your job or your work role. And so there's this thing that's happening, it seems to be the way we conflate our work identities and creativity's attachment to it and its prophylactic kind of benefits afterwards. And I agree with you that health ministries are not quite tuned into that spot yet. Mansa, let's go to you and your experiences with the BioCat.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. This has been very inspiring all the afternoon. So hearing such different perspectives on brain capital, this is something that it was quite new to us, and we are learning a lot today, and we are definitely going to implement our learnings as much as possible. So thank you for those insightful comments and presentations. So my name is Montse Daban. I work for BioCat. BioCat is a non-for-profit organization that is linked to the government of Catalonia, to the local and to the regional government, and has been created in 2006. So it's 16 years working for the life sciences and health tech sector in Catalonia to connect it also internationally and mostly at European level, but also with other ecosystems in the world. So I'm a PhD on molecular biology myself, and I also worked so I have some training also in science communication and in international relations. So that means that my my perspective there and also my insights are those from a quite transversal background. And I think that is also something that in the years has been related to somehow to brain capital or to creativity or seeing or learning on getting insights from many different sectors and fields. So I'm totally into it. So thank you for opening my mind also on that regard. So my role in BioCat as Director of Science, Policy and Internationalization is a little bit to calibrate the assets of the bioregion. The bioregion is the life sciences ecosystem in Catalonia, the health tech ecosystem. So how to face the European and global challenges, and this is definitely one of them. So aligning also BioCat initiatives and the bioregion assets to those challenges. Also tackling actions with global trends and strategies. That's what we do there. So I've been asked to explain a little bit what we do, our goals. So contributing to the transformational health system, also working with Paula on that regard, with Aquas and other stakeholders in the system, also with Axio, Catalonia Trade and Investment. Leire is there, hopefully, because she's having problems with the connection. Hi, Leire. So we benchmark life sciences clusters, other life sciences ecosystems, seeing how to find better opportunities for the bioregion, also for our brain capital, because like you said, opportunities, well, oh, and someone said also today that for entrepreneurs, creativity is linked to seeking opportunities and entrepreneurialism. So for us, this is pretty much it. So I've been asked to say in my work, where do brain capital, creativity and well-being intersect? So if I may add here, in 3 territories mainly. I try to gather them in 3 ideas. One is from our target group's perspective. So we talk to policymakers, to investors, and all the stakeholders in the life sciences, so the target groups. And those have been speaking for some time already about deploying resilience policies and instruments for preparedness. Definitely, this is extremely relevant to include brain capital in those policies. So this is something that we also will advocate for from our perspective. Also from a perspective, so we work on perspective, we see what will happen. We try to put our ecosystem in 5-year time. So we try to see what they will face at that time and help them there we know that tech transfer funding, talent, adoption of technology, industry consolidation are main challenges. But now we found more challenges now after all this pandemic and some geopolitical also instabilities or problems, grave problems that we face. So we see that planetary situation, twin transformation, resilience, industry sovereignty, sustainability, societal impact, all that has to do with brain capital. And we think that it also a big part of our work. And from an economic perspective, we set a strategy to scale up the ecosystem, but we cannot scale up the ecosystem if we do not take into consideration all those aspects. For example, how to research to reverse the cost of mental health treatment. That is important. Innovative aspects with this industry development. Change, if necessary, regulatory aspects. Why not? We have to change regulatory. Determine how brain skills or the loss of them impact also in the capacity to bring new developments. We talked about that, meaning brains are indispensable for human progress, and that's important. And to address diversity aspects. For example, are disabilities considered not as a problem of the individual, but as a barrier with the environment that we all have to break those barriers. And finally, from a gender perspective, because some inequalities made evident after the COVID involved that women have had to drop out the workforce, gender pay gaps have widened, increase in domestic violence, COVID brain health crisis have affected women more than men disproportionately. So for example, those are aspects. And then I'm trying to briefly go to the intersections that we expect to see, but we don't. So particularly, we expect to see those referred to relating brain capital and diversity and inequalities. More attention to brain skills and their value in the new economy, and seeing true deployment of brain capital in the Pact for Skills, for example, and in the European Skills Agenda. That's important because these are policies that have to be implemented, strengthening suitable competitiveness, as in the European Green Deal, ensuring social fairness, etc., training lifelong, building resilience to react to crisis. And what would be an indicator of success for your dashboard? For example, funds allocated to research in mental health, for example, I'm sure you already have that, and the impact on human activities that drive progress. Clinical trials, for example, trial recruiting in France, there's an example I just gathered, a role of social and territorial inequalities in the management of prognosis of multiple sclerosis. That's an example of a clinical trial, more clinical trials on that subject. Number of innovative solutions to mitigate mental health issues, and number of new demonstrators or living labs in Europe. That's a little bit what we should add to the dashboard. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting, Mats. And your mention of communications really raised for me a lot of things that typically get left out of these kinds of conversations. Like I was even thinking as you were talking, like as an indicator, what if the media and communications climate within which populations live were considered an environmental indicator alongside something like air quality? Like being able to put those things together. I think that we have the capabilities to mine types of data that we've never really been able to do before. Anna, Bob, let's come to you next for your insights.
Thank you so much to all of you, to Theo and Reem and Harris for organizing this and bringing this really esteemed group together. It's a fascinating discussion. So I come at this problem from the perspective of philanthropy because I advise philanthropists on where to invest their money, and I connect philanthropic capital to both to great social innovators and social entrepreneurs. And as I've been reflecting, one of the things I've been thinking about is that capital is still very conservative, and this may be more of an American problem, but we're still stuck in a capitalistic framework. I think, Dr. Nevin's, GDP is about productivity. We have an obsession with the productivity and output. And I would add to that, we also have an obsession with thinking we can predict exactly how new markets are going to emerge, even among, even with venture and even some of our more creative capital sources. And I think we really need some challenging assumptions in that. So I think, Dr. Freeman's comments were really helpful. I don't have a big 6 personality characteristic, but I would offer that adding to the framework of extroversion, openness, achievement, action orientation, I would add another factor, and that is mission focus, mission and meaning. This is what I really see in great social entrepreneurs and the philanthropists who support them. So looking at that mission and meaning focus, I see, several opportunities for this conversation. Again, the brain capital framework shift, I think from a policies perspective is so important, and I just want it to permeate even deeper, even permeate into how we think about capital, how we think about markets. One opportunity is public-private partnerships with states. I mean, people have spoken to this, partnering with their universities to bring in incubators and accelerators in states. And this, in the US, we've tried to do that, but there's still a sense that if you're not in Boston or Palo Alto, it's hard to get to the kind of scale you need. So I love to hear about some really, truly successful examples of that, because I think there's a real interest in philanthropy in doing that, and then partnering with states in that as well. Another opportunity I think has to do with, well, I guess it's more of a reflection, but I think Dr. Freeman's thought about innovators versus entrepreneurs, I think that there's a talent issue there, that a lot of times the innovator and the one who gets the R01 grant and who pushes the envelope on science and thought is not the one who can take that out the door to a new company and to really have the risks and achievement orientation. And this is a talent question, and it's a huge problem for philanthropy and finding, because philanthropic capital is so good at being that first capital that can come in and take risks. And then I would just also say that we have to really take big risks. And, you know, this is kind of like a riff on the Elon Musk flying cars, and we got 240 characters, but we are not going to be able to really get beyond this without, you know, looking at different market pathways, alternative business models, getting things that are different, but then it's ultimately going to take that big money. And I think we need to make those partnerships between sort of philanthropic, you know, efforts and the big money. And in the US, that big money has traditionally been private, but I think that you're being more successful in other countries, and we're trying to do that here. There's an effort called ARPA-H, and we're trying to get more public funding to help with translation here. So that's really all I had. I mean, the last is around marginalized communities and how to embrace, you know, the sort of working with the education system, workforce, even working with prisons. I love Dr. Sakeno's, you know, conversation about cognitive decline and working with public health systems. And that is an area that I think that if we can translate it into bite-sized pieces, that even local philanthropy and traditional philanthropy could get really, really interested in being the scalers of those kinds of ideas once this is organized. Maybe not the starters of those kinds of ideas, but once they're there, bringing them to their local schools. And we've already seen that with local philanthropy and its way to bring great ideas to local communities. So I would just close with saying that the indicator of success I would like to see would be capital that is deployed creatively. And perhaps that means in the absence of a currently known market pathway.
And a very quick follow-up. Do you have any thoughts on the role of the generational shift in values in family offices and how that is going to impact the deployment of capital?
With this issue specifically?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, there's actually a big shift back to local. So there is, I mean, we're seeing a big shift, at least in the US, to local communities with philanthropy. I think, you know, I think that, yeah, there's definitely a greater openness, you know, of course, with newer generations and, you know, mental health and brain health. I don't have any specific insights about that,
Okay.
You know, offhand beyond that.
All right. Thank you so much. Serenity from the University of Kentucky. The floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Perfect. Thank you for having me with you all here today. It's been so great. So to quickly touch on the questions that we were sent, you know, how does creativity, well-being show up in unexpected ways? My answer to this is research within academia, but not unexpected in the sense that we don't think it's going to happen. But the ways in which it shows up, right? So my particular role is in social innovation. And so we are really working to intentionally reach those researchers who have traditionally supported, right? And this goes back to the conversation earlier about researchers and innovators. And in entrepreneurship. And, you know, one of the things that I wrote down from that is that we refer to our researchers as innovators for a reason, right? And we're trying to teach them entrepreneurial skills and to amplify the entrepreneurial traits that are inside of them. Because the entrepreneurial element of creativity for our innovators has been silenced as a byproduct of the research cultivation, right? So what we see then is hope. You know, Theo talked earlier about the difference between hope and optimism. So what we see then is the hope around their research is what manifests. It's the optimism that opting out, that this will just eventually happen for me, shows up in their entrepreneurial lens and understanding, right? So by providing an intentional support system for them, we are then supporting and revitalizing that creativity inside of them. So I want to revisit Alejandro's comments, and I know he's already stepped out, and I'm a little disappointed about that because I loved his comments around creativity for survival, because that is absolutely how our researchers function within academia. You know, and specifically in my work within social innovation, it's not new to academia, right? Our researchers have been creating solutions for sustained social impact, for social justice, for the common good forever. That's not new. What is new is this system of support, because for many researchers, their research solutions, their creative innovations stemmed from survival, right? That need on their own to generate grants, publications, et cetera. So then the question for us becomes, what happens when we build an infrastructure in which those researchers can survive? In terms of expected intersections where we assumed it would happen, but we don't see it, I'm actually going to call on that mid-level industry support, and for some of our global organizations, but in the sense that they struggle with the creativity for what's next, those action items for how they are positioned within a community to make larger impact around moving progress forward, right? And I think this stems from an earlier conversation about the ways in which SETA started, the ways in which we are professionally cultivated. So then the last thing I'll say is in terms of metrics, right? We have to be creative about the metrics and data that we have and why we're going. It can't just be about reports. It's got to be about outcomes and action items and how we are going to move forward. But we only get there if we stop segmenting the information, segmenting the data, and we're using our own creativity and innovation principles around the data as well. And ultimately, what I would like to see is a normalizing of impact. Back to the conversation about SDG goals, right? I love what he was saying about that this should become the norm. So how are we normalizing impact over financial ROI? And I think that starts with our language and how we're talking about it. And so I'm interested to see how this plays forward in terms of how we're measuring self-sufficiency within communities, but also communities for progress for economic development. It's less than 5 minutes.
Thank you, Serenity, for that. Serenity has responsibilities in tech transfer and a research university in Appalachia. So those are some really interesting insights there, because if you look at some of the rural parts or developing countries that we've talked about earlier, or even urban communities of color or communities in Appalachia, there are more similarities in some ways there around these topics than not, but we have typically not thought about creativity and innovation taking place in those kind of locations in the same way we've thought about it in Silicon Valley, even though from a mechanism standpoint, it's kind of the same activity. So expanding kind of our aperture, I think, would be incredibly beneficial and yield some short-term wins that could yield longer-term results. Christina, let's come to you next in the room from the Sports Foundation.
Hi, everyone. First of all, we appreciate a lot this opportunity to show in a small slot, but very appreciated, what we do and who we are. Our foundation is Fundació Catalunya Sports. And before we start explaining that, who we are and what we do, I would like to ask you a question. How many of you played in the street when you were children? I mean, playing outside home with some other kids, in the neighborhood, near school with friends, schoolmates, yes? Okay. Don't be shy, come on. I can see there are quite a few hands raised. And I can imagine the most of the people on site on the screen also have played on the street in the same way as used to do it. So now it comes an important issue. The children of the first world are no longer children as we used to be, because children no longer play in the streets. And this is a fact. Activity is entertainment, and also is mental and physical health. It's necessary to stay fit and healthy, and it's important to start from an early age. And now here it comes another fact. Currently, 160 million children are overweight in the world. I repeat, 160 million. By 2030, this number is expected to exceed 250 million. So we are not neuroscientists, but we are absolutely convinced that the only way to reverse the situation is through healthy behaviors and habits. And here it comes, education again, and innovative methods to create, to think different and to act different. We work more specifically working on the combination of a healthy diet and daily physical activity. We are backed by decades of work and the experience of all our technicians and doctors. And we will explain about the doctors. We are also so sure of this binomial that we dedicate all our efforts and resources completely altruistically, of course, to work with children with obesity problems. And we use sport as if it were a tool of change of mind, to change the mindset. Therefore, we do not see sport simply to score a goal or to shoot a basket or win a race. We are absolutely convinced that the habit of sport generates routines, mechanisms in the brain that end up causing healthy behaviors. We all have to be able to give visibility to this pandemic, the obesity in children, and not normalize it as it seems to be happening. So far, the leading cause of childhood liver transplantation in the United States is due to obesity. By the Brown Hospital is one of the world's reference for pediatric liver transplants, and they have been the ones which have alerted us to this situation. Starting in September, we are very emotional about that, and we begin a program with Vallebrón Hospital, where we'll try to work with children who are at risk of receiving liver transplants and with their families. Very important, the families, because we need to give more conscious about the importance of changing eating habits and need to do daily physical exercise. We know that we have different enemies against us. The lobbies of fast food companies, industrial bakery, energy drinks, the slavery of the blue screens that turn our young people into zombies for hours. You know about that. Video games and its little rewards produce a constant feeling of anxiety, and you need to eat. Lack of healthy education in schools, the parents' lack of time to educating healthy food and sport behaviors to the children. This is our more important thing, and I think this is the main barriers that we have to go against. Our main goal is to integrate these ideas in the lifestyle of these sick children, and we want to improve the future of as many kids as we can from the inevitable liver transplants to which they are condemned right now. We will be very satisfied. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christina, for reminding us of the relationship between our physical health and brain health. We have Cynthia, we're going to come to you next there in the room. and then we'll turn it over to Paul to close us out for the day with a little bit of a report out on the meetings earlier this month and whatever other contribution you might be interested in leaving the group with. So Cynthia, you're up next.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Theo. And very happy to be here as well and to have this opportunity to exchange with all of you. I will be very briefly, but now that I'm the last one, I will want to wrap up because one of the things that it is very related to all of this, it's the city. So first of all, who I am. I am a urban planner, and I've been working mainly on public sector before, and basically on developing urban planning based on urban ecology approach. So that means to understand the cities and places as an ecosystem. And that means not only to drive design and urban planning from the physical structure point of view, but also to integrate as much as possible organisms, included people, animals, of course, biodiversity, and the processes that give us a regulation about all the ecosystem. So back then we were working, of course, from the axis of planning. And one of the issues, and I think that it's the oftenly when we're talking about the brain capital, I think about, because we back then we call it how to increase the complexity of the urban ecosystem. And that means how to increase not only the level of organization of the information that we achieve, because on natural ecosystems, we have like a jungle, imagine a desert and then a jungle. So of course, the process from a very simplified ecosystem into a complex system as a jungle, it means a process, but it means achieving a level of organization of those, of the genetical information. So in the cities, we were very focused on how we can go, and now I go to the urban model. And it links a lot what Christina was saying. We have the heritage from a urban model from the 20th century that was governed and dominated by car. I mean, it was a great advance, a technological advance, give us a lot of mobility and give us a lot of understanding of our territories, but at the same time oblige us to design our cities in a way so we lose playing areas and we lose the way that we interact among us. So public space becomes one, in my opinion, one of the critical points linking, and that's for me the strongest thing from my experience on urban planning and this idea of the brain capital. So the way that we can encourage the linking between society, but also as we can encourage ourselves and this imagination. I really appreciate the title of which is the power of imagination and creativity. And I will add the willingness to do. So it is important to imagine. It is important to have creative solutions to solve it, but also the mechanisms to do it. And here I will explain a bit what it was one of an example that I'm very proud of it. It's because we work on the superblocks model. I'm sure that most of the colleagues that are here. So this was work in this idea of the ecosystemic thinking. And it took a lot of years that policymakers understood the model. Take a lot of years to develop itself the technical thinking. But finally, when it was implemented, I think the key element, it was not only to have clear how to solve the mobility networks, how to solve where is going to be the bicycle or not, the services, but it was the detonant element was people. It was the neighbors in Poblano that they encouraged themselves and they took this idea of the superblock because it was just happening at the starting point. So then they encourage the transformation. So if we really want to go into this idea of how connecting people, connecting organizations, connecting policies I think that it's a process. It's a set of process aligning them, but it is possible to do. So I think it's relevant to also understand and to encourage that it's not only a theoretical point of view, but it is important that we can see examples, that we can see how this can be tangible. Okay. Yes, because sometimes when I mean, it is good because science is relevant and science has to be more closer to citizens. So we have to work on how to make it legible, understandable, and that there's an ethics behind. So the ethics, I think it's one of the very, very important pillars also to transfer this idea, and that the final purpose has to be how we can increase well-being, or how we can increase even the empathy among communities, no, or the empathy among territories. So I will end with this, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Joel, the floor is yours, my friend, to close us out for this marathon of day. Before you get started, I just want to give my huge debt of gratitude for everybody who has survived the last 4 hours. We have navigated quite a lot of territory and a parade of intellect and creativity across the screen. So I'm deeply grateful to everyone, and to Ram and Harris and the team there in Barcelona who organized the video and the in-person thing. Thank you all for your all's continued inspirational leadership on all of this. So the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you, Theo, so much. It has been a wonderful journey over the course of the past few days. Who would have thought that it was only literally last week that we had the first launch event in Paris, and then Brussels, and now Barcelona today. So let me walk you through what we did very quickly. So in Paris, we had the presentation of the Brain Capital Alliance by Harris, as we did also in Brussels and today. The focus was very much on mental health, with some excellent remarks on the impact of COVID, the cost of mental disorders, and also impact of wars on mental health. We had sort of a very virtuous mix of political endorsement coming from the French Europe minister on the last day of French EU presidency. So we could not have been more fortunate than that. And it all happened also on the eve of announcement earlier today of a massive French investment in precision psychiatry. So that was Paris. Then on Monday, we were in Brussels, hosted by one of the leading think tanks there, the Center for European Policy Studies. And all that is relevant because CEPS does more socioeconomic and foreign policy work. And we were coming to them with an agenda that they were not that familiar with, but definitely took an interest. So RIM and Harris presented the Brain Capital Alliance. This was very powerful. And then we focused on brain health, one of our key themes, with top speakers from WHO, the European Commission, the European Federation of Neurological Associations, so that's the patients' representatives, and the European Brain Council. And we focused a lot on policy, but also on patient involvement and greater accessibility of data. What I took out of that is really the fact that we need to focus the first months and years of the alliance on some core issues, and for me, brain health definitely belongs to that category. And this is not only because the bill and the challenge of neurological disorders and mental disorders is growing, and it is growing with the aging of the society, quite exponentially, in fact, It's also because more and more people are actually aware of the need to preserve good brain health into the later period in the life. People want to stay cognitively active also in the later part of the life. And we know more as well about how to keep good brain health. And finally, on the right-hand side here, you can see something which is close to my heart and close to what I do on a daily basis, namely, how do we make technology part of this? How do we make sure that, that scientific breakthroughs are better enabled? So we talked a lot in Brussels, especially about the policy momentum growing for these issues, for brain health in this case in particular, because there is a global action plan now at the level of the World Health Organization. It was accepted unanimously in May of this year. A month later, the European Commission followed up with a major initiative of its own on non-communicable diseases with a chapter on mental health and neurological disorders. We also have very active community efforts, and the One Neurology initiative, I think, is worth our attention because it has really made very strong inroads. And what is happening in Europe, which is interesting, is that countries are developing their own brain plans. Now, they are usually focused on brain research and brain health, but there is no reason why we couldn't discuss with policymakers a broader scope of these brain plans, so as to cover also many of the aspects of the Brain Capital Alliance that have been discussed also today. Now, where I come from again is science and helping science. So this is understanding the brain. I think we do have to, in this process, remain focused on research. Research is in a fascinating phase. Some neuroscientists say that the field is more or less where physics was in the 19th century, namely just ahead of its most fundamental discoveries. So you can either get frustrated because it's coming so late, or fascinated because it's about to come. And I would definitely urge us to think about that through the second prism. So eBrains, the research infrastructure, which I'm the head of, is basically an enabler of these scientific breakthroughs. So we bring technological change, revolutionary, I have to say, technological change to the labs to enable progress in brain research and brain health. And this is not to scare you at the end of the session, but it's just an exemplification of the type of work which is happening. So we have different simulators of brain activity, because brain is so complex that we will not be able to decode it anytime soon. And therefore, the simulation technique is needed in order to better understand the brain. And these simulators are now working at different levels of brain organization, and they are beginning to talk to each other. So just like in climate policy, and you need simulation as well, because we are dealing with a very complex phenomenon. The same is true in brain research. And there are some fascinating new breakthrough achievements. Maybe zooming in on the one in the middle here, it's the spinal cord implants, which enables a paralyzed person to walk within 24 hours. Absolutely fantastic research, which is, I would say, and I would hope, about to be rolled out at scale. The last point, also brain prosthesis for the blind. It's not for today, but possibly for tomorrow. The researchers are really making good progress in restoring vision. At the moment, it's rudimentary vision, but for a blind person, this is, of course, miraculously a lot already. Now, to finish, I wanted to say a few words about an initiative which we have launched, and it's basically about making sure that there is a scaling up of effort in the area of brain research, brain health. This is focused in Europe, but there are, of course, also initiatives that go beyond. And it's about more funding. It's about inclusion of brain health in the broader health policy approach. It's about alignment of research agendas, which are often fragmented. I think what we have not said yet, what I have not said yet now, is that there is a lot of fragmentation in this field that we need to address. Namely, perhaps it's also due to the fact that that the brain is such a complex organ and such a complex challenge, and a lot of approaches to the neurological disorders have also not worked sufficiently well. So for that reason, we need to scale up the effort, and we need to think about this in broader fashion. And of course, the matters of data are absolutely critical. So at the end, I already sort of tested these three propositions in Paris and then in Brussels. So I would also like to share them with you today in the Barcelona context, because when I started thinking, what is so appealing in this Brain Capital Alliance, which some people may say, it's too broad and difficult to understand. What does connecting brain with the capital mean? So for me, it's really about these three things, namely being holistic, about the centrality of the brain. And that means not just brain research and brain health, which is what I work on, but it's also brain skills. It's also creativity, which you have discussed today. Secondly, it's very much about being science and evidence focused. And I think that's what we are very strongly committed to doing. It's about bringing neuroscience-inspired insights into policymaking. Education, I would say, especially merits bringing neuroscientific insights into how curricula are designed and how the approach is designed. And last but not least, we simply need more funding and more investment in this field, and we need that quite urgently, because again, the challenge is growing with the aging of societies. But also we need to be able to understand the brain much faster than the current trajectory would indicate. And there is so much to be gained from brain-inspired technology as well, including in the field of climate policy. Neuromorphic chips are much more energy efficient than the classical traditional chips. And therefore, there are a lot of insights which could be used in other fields of technology. So these are the three reasons why I find the concept of Brain Capital Alliance extremely appealing. It is, I would say, it is a fascinating journey, and I'm entirely convinced that we will be looking back to today's meeting in Barcelona, to the meetings in Brussels and Paris, as the beginning of something really important and meaningful. And I'm sure that all of us in the room are deeply committed to making this happen. Thanks so much, Theo.
Thank you. We are at the end. I'm going to drop something here in the chat for everyone. In October 13 and 14 in Denver, Colorado, we are hosting the first Global Imaginator Summit. It will be the first kind of US presentation of the findings of a lot of this to a group of government and corporate leaders here in town, as well as be a companion event to SETA, who you heard earlier talk about the Cross-Atlantic Creativity Congress. This event will also be a companion to that. The Imaginator Academy is being led by the University of Colorado, Denver, also a partner in the Brain Capital Alliance, along with a number of other partners. Mary Rose, who represents A2RU, and others are partners with us in that, as is the Brain Capital Alliance. We have launched a national census, workforce census of creativity and belonging in the workforce, where we are measuring a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, ranging from hope and curiosity to creativity, a sense of awe, compassion, and many of the other things that we typically don't talk about when we talk about things like capital and economy. So I'm very grateful to everyone for your contributions today. Courage and imagination are indeed things that we will all need in the years to come if the last couple of years are any indicator of what lies in store. But at the end of the day, my confidence is placed in my fellow humans. The systems that we have are systems that we created. And so as things evolve and new information becomes available, we can create new ones that better support both human and economic growth at the same time. Rem, I'll turn it over to you to close this out.
Okay, Harris didn't want to say anything, so we can close even faster. I would like, first of all, to thank you all for coming over and sharing this long 4 hours with us. I think the venue is pretty beautiful, so it gives us back an idea that creativity has been there for centuries, and we are trying to really create in a different way to respond to our economic and societal challenges. I think the challenges are huge. The meeting today is extremely rich, but at the same time, it shows the complexity of the brain capital concept. We need to make it clearer, simpler, eventually more impactful. And then obviously there are many aspects to it, different disciplines. We need to align our understanding and ensure that the approaches that are converging to an impact that is really not only impacting the institutions, but also the individuals and everybody of us. I think the richness today has been great. I learned a lot from each one of you and from the screen, from everybody who has been connected online. And I think this is really a great opportunity that we need to continue to work together to co-design new approaches, new thinking, and new paradigm. And I remember in the time with Carlo Sessa, with whom we have been working for many years on well-being. I mean, of course, growth, economic development, sustainability, inclusion for several years now. I think we're moving into what I call the transformational scenario. Of course, this transformational scenario is essential to respond to our societal challenges, but then brain aspects and having the neuroscience advances and other discipline advances all together, put in simple terms by economists. Sometimes it's a bit complex because we always try to simplify lives to make policies work much easier. But I think we need to understand that reality is complex and we need to try to deal with it as much as possible. So thank you very much for all who made the time today. I thank Theo and Harris for this great opportunity and this great collaboration. Pavel, thank you very much also. It has been a great journey since a couple of months we've been working on this. And all the members of the working group, Shekar, all the people who are not here with us today, Connell, Carol, Andrew. I don't see Andrew on screen, sorry. Maybe he's disconnected, he's from Nigeria. So everybody has been working for free, practically. We don't have funding for all of this. And these are all an initiative by every institution, everybody. Thank you, Harris, for this really great work that has been there. And we see the impacts, we see the tangible results today. I would also like to thank the support function at EMEA. They have been really great to organize this event. Maria Alana, she has been quite ill these 2 days and she really pushed as much as possible. I hope she recovers soon. Sarah, of course, you know all Sarah. She has been working for 2 years on the Brain Capital dashboard and also on the working group. Thank you very much for this great effort. And Anna and Cynthia, of course, Cynthia, she's here and she contributed with the work that she's doing, and she sees a lot of opportunities also in terms of the urban planning and all these aspects. So thank you all. I didn't forget anybody. Yagane, yes, sorry, Yagane, since I don't see the names. Yagane, thank you very much. And George, obviously, he's our our communication officer. So thank you all for this great work, and we'll continue. So this is the beginning. And then I invite you all for a cocktail outside, but not the guys on the screen. So I'm afraid we cannot, we are not creative enough to have the cocktail reaching you. So the cocktail will be here for whoever is here, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you, Theo. Thank you all.
No teleporters yet.
Bye.